Throughout March, we celebrate Women's History Month, which recognizes the vital contributions of women to history, culture, and society. Personally, Women's History Month reminds me how fortunate we are that the 7-Eleven family of brands is committed to taking bold action when it comes to fostering an inclusive workplace culture. In honor of Women's History Month, we have a treat in store for you with a special guest speaker who has an incredible story. Alison Levine is a bold adventurer, a history-making polar explorer, a mountaineer, a team captain of the first American women's Everest expedition, and an adjunct professor at West Point, and so much more. She survives sub-zero temperatures, hurricane-force winds, sudden avalanches, and even a career on Wall Street. She's fearless, and thanks to her expertise in leading teams in extreme environments like these, she's also a best-selling author and highly sought-after leadership development consultant and speaker. She draws relevant parallels between mountaineering and business because she's experienced both on multiple mountains in multiple organizations and industries. Her leadership guidance is as refreshingly unique as she is. For example, she says that sometimes, and I quote, "backwards is often the right direction when climbing a mountain like Everest." Sounds counterintuitive, I know, but you'll understand when she explains it and realize how we can apply this fascinating lesson and so many others to our daily lives. I'm thrilled that Alison joined us to share the amazing things she's learned from her adventures, and I'm confident she'll inspire us to use our talents to contribute even more impactfully to 7-Eleven and our family of brands. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy this conversation with Alison Levine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special segment of our Activate Her Professional Development Series. I'm Amy Vanderoff, and we are here today with a very special guest in honor of Women's History Month. Alison Levine has climbed to the highest peak on every continent, skied across the Arctic Circle to the geographic North Pole, and get this, made history as the first American to follow a remote route across West Antarctica for 600 miles to the South Pole. All of this while hauling 150 pounds of gear and supplies in a sled harnessed to her waist. And there's so much more than that, too. She's an incredible, accomplished, and inspiring woman, and we say hello to Alison Levine.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here with you. It's great to be with everybody.
I am so excited to share so many of your insights, accomplishments, and stories with everyone today. And I kind of want to take them back to the young version of Alison, right? So I would love to know, growing up in Arizona, right, is where you were from, where did you draw inspiration from? Where did you get this desire placed on your heart? Where did this all begin when you thought, I can do that? I can climb to summits. I can go to the highest peak. I want to tackle mountains. Where did that thought and desire come from?
Okay, so when I was a kid growing up in Phoenix, I was obsessed with the stories about the early Arctic and Antarctic explorers and the early mountaineers. I love the stories of cold places because it felt like an escape from the extreme summer heat in Phoenix. 110, 115, 120 degrees sometimes. It is so hot there. So I loved stories about cold places. So I would read these books and I'd watch these documentary films. But I never thought I would go to any of those places because I had some health challenges growing up. I was born with a hole in my heart that got bigger as I got older. And I had my first heart surgery when I was 17 years old. That one didn't go very well, but I had my second one when I turned 30. And a few months after that, this light bulb went on in my head. And I thought, okay, wait, now that I have good health and a strong heart, if I want to know what it's like to be this guy, Reinhold Messner, and drag a 150-pound sled across 600 miles of Antarctic ice, then I should go to Antarctica and ski 600 miles across the continent. If I want to know what it's like to be these guys going to these remote mountain ranges, then I should go to the remote mountain ranges instead of reading books and watching documentaries about all these other people doing these things. So I thought, if these guys can do this, why can't I do it too? So I actually climbed my first mountain when I was 32 years old, and I'm turning 58 next month and still going.
I love that you gave us that beginning story because I kind of want to go back and give Alison Levine like a side hug in her younger years and just say it's going to be okay. So many of us have these challenges and obstacles. You had a misdiagnosed health issue where you didn't know why you weren't feeling at your optimum best. And then you set out to do something so grand and so big. And so then the story begins. And so your first mountain and your first challenge was going to Africa. Can you start there for us?
Yes. Okay. I'm so glad you asked about this because I really want to share this story. So the first mountain I ever went to was Mount Kilimanjaro. And I'm sure a lot of you watching this have even gone there. I mean, tens of thousands of people climb this mountain every year. It's not incredibly difficult. It's not technical, but you do have to have some endurance and be willing to, push yourself through discomfort because the elevation is over 19,000 feet. So you definitely feel the altitude, right? The altitude headache, the challenge to breathe deeply, you might feel sick to your stomach. So I decide I'm going to go on vacation and I want to go do something that I wouldn't have been able to do before my surgery. So I make these plans to go to Kilimanjaro with two girlfriends. 2 weeks before we're supposed to go, my girlfriends that I was going with decided that they wanted to go to Club Med in Cancun instead. So they said, let's go to Cancun. This sounds like a better idea. Well, I wanted to do something, like I said, that I wouldn't have been able to do before. And so I said, forget it. I want to go to Kilimanjaro. I want to go see what it feels like to try to climb a tall mountain. And so I used frequent flyer miles and I just went over to Mount Kilimanjaro by myself. I found a local guide at the base of the mountain. My guide, Sammy, I think it was $300 at the time. And I climbed Kilimanjaro with a local guide and a couple of porters. And the reason that this climb was so important, and this is why I really want to share the story with you all. Again, not the tallest mountain, not the most technical mountain, but it was important because it was my first time at altitude where on summit day, I got out of my tent and I thought, oh my gosh, I have a terrible banging headache. I feel like I'm going to vomit. I'm having trouble breathing. I don't think I'm going to be able to go to the summit, but you know what? I'm just going to take a few steps. And then I'm going to turn around and go down. So I took a couple of steps, outside of my tent. And I thought, well, I'm definitely going to go down, but I'm just going to take a couple more steps. I took a couple more steps. Okay, I know I'm so uncomfortable. My head is killing me. I can't breathe very well. But before I go down, I'm just going to take a couple more steps. And I would take a couple more steps. Well, eventually I get to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. And it was such an important lesson for me because I realized that even when you feel incredibly uncomfortable, you can still keep going. Just because you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean you have to throw in the towel and call it quits. You can still move toward an important goal even when you feel uncomfortable. And so on any subsequent mountain or in any situation after that, it didn't have to be in the mountains. It could be in my career or anywhere else when I felt uncomfortable and I thought, okay, that's it. I can't do this. I think to myself, wait a minute. You felt like this before and you kept going then. And so you can keep going now. You just draw on that last experience that tells you can keep going. And that voice that tells you that you can't do it is the same voice that will tell you can keep going. You just have to train it to speak to you differently.
I love that. The metaphoric mountain and the physical mountain. And you had to have a positive first experience doing something that would have been very easy for you to go to Club Med in Cancun, by the way, and sit on the beach and drink some, daiquiris or something. But you went, did the uncomfortable thing of leaving your friends and your planned trip, and then you had that experience to draw from next time you climbed a mountain. So we had that experience. So when you got that phone call that we would like you to captain the first American women's Everest expedition, what did you think?
In 2001, I got that phone call inviting me to serve as the team captain for the first American women's Everest expedition. By then, I had climbed the highest peak on 6 continents. And there's this achievement called the 7 summits that a lot of mountaineers aspire to complete. And it's climbing the highest peak on all 7 continents. So I'd climbed the highest peak on 6 continents, get the phone call to serve as the team captain for the first American women's Everest expedition. But when I first got the phone call, you would think I would have said, like, yes, I'm in. But I really got intimidated and I thought, well, Everest, this is in a completely different category than any of the other mountains that I had climbed. Once you get above 26,000 feet, you're in the death zone, like a totally different type of climb. And I started to think about it and I got really intimidated. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't know if I'm going to be fast enough. I don't know if I'm going to be strong enough. It just feels like way too much of a challenge for me. But then I realized there was only going to be one first American women's Everest expedition. So if I didn't step up to the plate to be the team captain, somebody else was going to do it. Somebody else was going to be living my dream adventure. So I ended up calling these women back and agreeing to serve as the team captain. And at the time, I still really didn't know if I had what it was going to take to get up that mountain. But I knew if I didn't step up to the plate and try, that I would never find out. And I think there are times in your life where you just have to step up, even if you feel like you aren't ready.
I love that because the fear of missing out was greater than the fear of stepping up.
FOMO. Yes.
FOMO, it's real. Okay, and then of course you had to fund this expedition. There was a lot of things you had to do before you ever stepped foot on the mountain. In your book, you detail about fundraising and about not just a pitch email, which is, could easily be ignored. You sent one of your hiking boots in a box to media outlets like ESPN, to, big companies like Nike, and said, we need sponsors, we need help.
Yeah, so I think, when you are fundraising, just like anything else you want in life, in business, whatever it is, when you want something from someone, their time, their attention, their money, whatever it is, you need to differentiate yourself. And I figured these companies get hit up for sponsorship all the time. So I wanted to do something that would sort of force people to take action, something they couldn't ignore. So I got a cardboard box and I put my hiking boot in it, one hiking boot. And I mailed it to people with this letter. And I was like, "Dear Dick Vitale," or he was the person I reached out to at ESPN. "I am the team captain for the first American Women's Everest expedition. Here's what we want to do. We want to be the first team of American women to conquer the world's highest peak." And then at the end I wrote, "And P.S. I really need to train hard for this expedition, and you have my hiking boot. So whether or not you choose to, help us with funding, can you at least send my boot back so I can keep training?" But then it was so funny. So I get the box back from Dick Vitale. He was just one of the people I sent it to. I sent it to Nike too, but and he sent me like an 8x10 glossy, like autographed glossy. And he was like, "Good luck with the climb. Here's your boot." Like, he didn't end up, sending us any money. We didn't get anything from ESPN. I did get my boot back and an 8x10 glossy of Dick Vitale. But yeah, I just kept thinking like, well, they've got to send the boot back and respond in some way. So I thought, this is a way that I'm going to get people to respond to me.
I love that, because you're talking about thinking outside of the box, but also thinking inside of the box, right? So,
but I see what you did there.
Thank you. I'm here for the jokes too, but it's true, right? Like, that's what's, again, the physical mountain, the metaphorical mountain, inside the box, outside the box. Sometimes we just have to think a little bit differently. And I love when you make asks of someone, right? Where it's, you need a mentor, you need a sponsor, you need money, you need something. You think about, how can I help them and they help me at the same time? And you helped them by differentiating yourself and making their they could maybe not do what you asked, but it made it easier for them to communicate with you and remember exactly who you were,
right,
what you needed, what you were all about. And okay, so eventually you do make it to Everest, and this is now 2002, right?
Yes, 2002. So I put the team together, and that was also a very interesting process, because you have to find people who are the right mix of skilled and experienced, but are also going to be really good team players. And I can honestly say, if I had to pull together another team of women, it'd be the exact same ones. We had a great mix of women ranging in age from 34 to 58. And yeah, a great group of women. So we get to the mountain, and the first thing that you need to know about climbing Mount Everest is that it's not at all straightforward. And it's going to take you about 10 days of hiking just to get yourself to base camp. So you're hiking for 10 days just to get to the base of the mountain. Once you get to base camp, you have to spend a few days and nights there to get used to the altitude. Once you've been there for a few days, then you pack up your stuff and you climb up to Camp 1. You spend the night up at Camp 1, it's over 20,000 feet. And the next day, after you spend the night up at Camp 1, you pack up your stuff and you come back down to base camp again. Then you spend a few more nights at base camp again. And then the next day you climb to Camp 1 again and you spend the night. And then the next day you climb up to Camp 2 and you spend the night up there at Camp 2. And the next day, after you spend the night up there at Camp 2, you pack up your stuff and you come back down to base camp again. Spend a few more nights at base camp again. Next day, climb to Camp 1 again and spend the night. Next day, climb to Camp 2 again, spend the night. Next day, you're going to spend about 9 or 10 hours fighting your way up there to Camp 3. As you can see from this graphic, it's almost 24,000 feet. And the next day, guess where you go? All the way back down to that base camp again. So the reason you have to keep coming back down to base camp is because you have to let your body get used to the altitude very slowly. It's this process called acclimatization. If someone were to magically drop you off on the summit of Mount Everest, if you could be dropped up there by a plane or a helicopter or something like that, you'd be dead in a matter of minutes from the altitude. So you have to move up the mountain really slowly just so your head doesn't pop off when you get to the very top. But the catch is that anytime you're above about 18,000 feet, which you can see is any camp above that base camp, anytime you're above 18,000 feet, your body is starting to deteriorate and your muscles are getting weaker. So it's this crazy catch-22 of wanting to spend time up high to get used to the altitude. But you have to keep coming back down low so you can eat, sleep, hydrate, and regain some strength. So not only is it very physically challenging to be going up and back down again and up higher and back down, but psychologically, it is incredibly frustrating as well because right? You need to be going this way, right, to get to the summit, but you're spending a heck of a lot of time climbing in this direction. But what you have to remember is that even though you are going completely backwards, you're still making progress, right? Because you're helping your body acclimatize. And for whatever reason, we tend to think that progress has to happen in one particular direction, but that's not the case. Sometimes you are going to have to go backwards for a bit in order to eventually get to where you want to be. So please do not ever look at that backtracking as losing ground. I want you to look at it as a way to regroup, regain some strength so that you're better out of the gates the next time around. And I actually have a phrase I want to remind people of, which I trademarked this phrase because I love it so much, which is that backing up is not the same as backing down, right? Backing up, not the same as backing down. Every time you got to turn around and go in a different direction than the direction that you thought you were going to go in or the direction you initially wanted to go in, you look at that as an opportunity. And then when you get to where you need to be, you're going to be that much better for it.
There's so much good here, Alison. I just want everyone just to take a moment and like feel all of that, which Alison just shared. I love that. So backing up is not the same as backing down. Alison, I love that so much. Okay, so when we think about this, metaphorically speaking, we need to overcome or compensate for our weaknesses. And, maybe I want you to share the end of that story of you were with this team and you did all the right things, right? You did all the right things, everything you just said to us. What happened at the end of that?
Okay, so we're on the mountain for almost 2 months at this point, because that's how long an Everest expedition takes. It takes 2 months. And it's our summit day. We get to this place called the South Summit. It's just a couple hundred feet below the true summit of Mount Everest. You can see it in the photo there. And that point, storm clouds started to come in. So that's where we had to make a very tough call. And the first American women's Everest expedition turned around just a few hundred feet from the summit of Mount Everest. And trust me when I tell you that turning around and walking away from the deal is harder than continuing on. But when you're up there in these mountains, you have to be able to make very tough decisions when the conditions around you are far from perfect. And you have to think about how every single move you make is going to affect everybody else around you and not just you. So it doesn't matter how much blood, sweat, and tears you personally put into something. If the conditions aren't right, you turn around, you cut your losses, and you walk away. Mount Everest, it's just a pile of rock and ice. It's really all it is. You can always go back. But if you do something dumb up there and use poor judgment, you may not have the opportunity to go back. And we all know of instances where one person's poor judgment has brought down an entire organization, right? Same thing in the mountains. One person's bad decision can bring down an entire team. And look, I know a lot of you, you're looking at that photo, you see how close we are to the summit, and you're thinking, like, why couldn't you just run and touch the tippy top, run back down? You can't run up there because at that elevation, you have to take about 5 to 10 breaths for every step. So a couple hundred feet would take us several hours, and we didn't feel like we had that much time left of a decent weather window. So that's where we had to turn around. Good thing we got caught in a whiteout on our descent. And we had to spend the night at 26,000 feet in a storm. That's not where you want to spend the night because you're up in the death zone at that elevation at 26,000 feet. They call it the death zone because human life can no longer be sustained and your body is slowly starting to die. You want to spend as little time as possible in the death zone. But it was really hard to make that decision to turn around. But as I mentioned, you always have to err on the side of safety for your team. You can always go back, right? And what people have to remember is that the summit is never the goal. The summit of Mount Everest is not the goal. Number one goal, come back alive. Number two, come back with all your fingers and toes. Number three, come back as friends with the people that you're with. Maybe goal number 4, goal number 5 is get to the top of the mountain. That cannot be your number one goal.
Every time you say the word death zone, like the hairs on my arms just stand up. And when you illustrate everything that you just did for us, none of us would say that was a failure story, right? Including yourself. So it's amazing what that perception of really showing the whole story gives you. And I love when you say, going up to the summit, that's, an option, but what's mandatory is getting back down and thinking about the entire team and having to make those decisions when your brain is not performing at its optimum peak level in those conditions. As a leader, Alison, what that illustrates is something so powerful and so great and so useful for so many people watching.
I mean, we were the first team of American women to even try something like this, right? It was an altitude record for everybody on the team. Yet the media was so focused on the fact that we did not make it. And it just was so hard to just have that, do these interviews, TV interviews, interview after interview where they're like, oh, you didn't make it. How does that make you feel?
Oh, gosh.
Like a loser. How do you think it makes me feel? Let's focus on the fact that, we were the first team of American women. We set altitude records for all of us. We hope to have inspired the next generation of female climbers to get out there and push themselves and get out of their comfort zones, get into this sport that in 2002 it was still mostly men that you saw on the mountains. And now you see a lot more women. And, I'm so pleased to see that now.
That's why you're such a great leader, and that's why you're here today sharing your golden little tidbits with us today. But ultimately, Alison, you went back. What happened?
Okay, so it took me 8 years to get up the guts to go back and try it again. And it's like long story, but I was actually climbing in honor of a friend of mine that passed away very unexpectedly at age 37. And she was always the person I always thought, if I ever go back to Mount Everest, I want to go with my friend Meg Bertay, because she was just this like dynamo woman that just seemed to have no fear and was willing to try all of these things that were outside of her comfort zone. She was an amazing, amazing athlete. She was all-American soccer player in college, captain of her soccer team, and she passed away unexpectedly. And I thought, okay, if I ever went back to Everest, I'd want to go with Meg. So after she passed, I felt like I wanted to do something to honor this brave woman. And so I engraved her name in my ice axe, and I went back to Mount Everest in 2010. And I actually did make it to the summit that time in honor of my girlfriend, Meg. And the craziest thing is that I got to the summit. I thought it was going to be this like amazing feeling of this is the most exciting day of my life. And it actually felt a bit anticlimactic, because let's just put this in perspective again, shall we? Mount Everest is just a pile of rock and ice. And standing on top of a pile of rock and ice doesn't change the world. You know what does change the world? Lots of other stuff, technology, innovation, advances in healthcare. How about raising kind, compassionate children that will contribute to their community? And here's the biggest thing that I think can change the world. And this is something we can all do every single day. How about just being there to lend a few kind words of support to somebody who's having a tough time? All these things I've mentioned and many other things are things that really do change the world. And we all have an opportunity to engage in that kind of behavior every single day. So, well, of course, I was excited to get to the summit of Everest, not only because it was the summit, but for me, that was the completion of what's known as the Adventure Grand Slam, which is climbing the 7 summits and then skiing to both the North and the South Pole. And at the time, there were only a couple people in the world that had done that. So I was excited to be there, but also focused on getting down safely, right? Because summit's only the halfway point. Got to get yourself back down. And just also realizing like I'm glad that I did it, but I have a long life to live ahead of me, and I can make an impact by, like I said, just being a person who encourages others, by being a person who can share my story about overcoming fear and getting past those difficult moments, and just also reminding people, because I was scared, even going back to Mount Everest the second time, I felt a lot of fear, not just fear of failure, but fear of what the mountain presents. There's this area called the Khumbu Icefall, which is where most of the accidents occur on Mount Everest. You can see it in the photo here. And watching this video, this is something that always scared me. This Khumbu Icefall always scared me. But this is where I really learned that you can be scared and brave at the same time. And that is really the mindset that I want all of you to embrace. You can be scared and brave at the same time, because I couldn't seem to like squash my fear on the mountain. I felt scared every day, but I realized you can still be brave even when you feel scared. And when you feel that fear, you can keep going.
I mean, we already knew that you were physically tough, Alison, from knowing all of the things that your body has physically done. But when we hear about the mental toughness part, and I always think that that's the hardest part to hone, because we're human, and life gets in the way, other personalities get in the way, we get in our own way sometimes. But when you perfectly described getting to the summit in honor of your friend Meg, which was so beautiful, and what a great moment that you felt led to go back 8 years later, we were captivated by your journey way before that, when you were talking about your 2 months and organizing this team and all of the media that you did and how many people you inspired. It's not about the destination, it really is about the journey. And that is what's given us all those feel-good moments right now.
Yes, it really is. Like for me, the summit didn't feel that important, but the journey did feel so important. because of that previous failure I had in 2002, like most of the people that were trying to summit the day I did in 2010 actually turned back, because in 2010, I also had a storm come in and I was climbing in very similar conditions to what I turned back in, what we all turned back in 2002. But because of that previous experience, I knew a heck of a lot more about my pain threshold, about my risk tolerance, and most importantly, I knew what it felt like to get the living snot kicked out of me high up on that summit ridge in a storm. And I wasn't afraid of that the second time around. And because of that previous failure, I really feel like that is what enabled me to keep going the second time. If I hadn't had that previous failure, I probably would have turned around in that storm in 2010. But I thought, wait a minute, I've been up here before. I know what this feels like. And even though I don't have great visibility down the trail, that doesn't mean I can't keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that's another great lesson that I took from these climbs, is that you don't have to know what's coming at you down the trail in order to just put one foot in front of the other. If you have clarity in your intent, you don't need clarity in your environment, right? Just put one foot in front of the other. And that's who gets to the top of this mountain, by the way. It's not necessarily the best, fastest, strongest climbers. It's the climbers who are willing to keep going no matter how uncomfortable it gets. That's who summits Mount Everest.
And that's who summits in their career, in their life,
Yes.
in their personal
Yes.
decision making. Again, so many good bits here that we can apply. And talk about how you demonstrate leadership on a team. Because when you have to demonstrate leadership on a team, you are in extreme conditions. And we mentioned this before, when your body and your mind is not working at its optimum peak because you have so many other variables around you that are compromising you. So how at that moment do you demonstrate great leadership?
There's a couple of things I want to mention. First, always like keeping in mind the health and safety of the team is always the number one goal, right? But part of leadership too is making sure that everybody on the team knows that you care about them. Because when people feel like their leader cares, that is what builds that trust and loyalty on a team. And when people feel that trust and loyalty, that is what gets them to go the extra mile. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. And I'm going to take you off the mountain for a minute and take you to the campaign headquarters for Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was running for governor of California in 2003. In 2003, I was deputy finance director for Arnold when he was running for governor. And deputy finance director sounds like a very fancy title, but I was actually a very junior staffer on the campaign. And he had a lot of very senior, experienced political consultants and high profile people in politics working for him. So I was very much a junior, like I say I'm a nobody, but we're all somebodies. Nobody's a nobody, right? But I kind of felt like, oh, I'm just like not as important as these other very senior, well-known political strategists. About 5 days into the campaign, he walks by me in the hallway and he looked at me and he said, "How's our mountain climber doing today?" And it stopped me in my tracks because I thought, how does he know that about me? He probably didn't even know my name at that point, but clearly he had taken the time to get to know about something that was important to me personally. I mean, he could have walked by me and said, "Hey, how's campaign finance? Did you get Mark Cuban on the phone? Is he sending us a donation?" Right? He didn't ask me about what I was doing for him or what I was doing in my job. He asked about something that had no benefit to him at all. "How's our mountain climber doing?" I thought, if he knows that about me, he knows something about every single person who is working for him. And to me, that was such a strong leadership lesson and this sign, like an example of what a strong leader does. They make sure every person as an individual knows that he cares about them as a human being. And the other thing to remember is that don't make the mistake of thinking that because somebody got a raise, a promotion, a bonus, an award at a meeting, that you don't need to still tell them how important they are. Leaders have to make sure that everybody feels valued and important. And by the way, every single person on a team is in a leadership position. Every single person. Leadership is not about title or tenure or having people report to you. Leadership is about realizing that every single member of a team, regardless of title or tenure, has a responsibility to help that team move toward a goal. And everybody also has a responsibility to be looking out for one another. You cannot leave that to one person or a couple of people with certain titles. Everybody has to have a hand in that.
I love that story so much from Arnold, because everybody wants their accomplishments, their life to be witnessed, and you want to feel seen. And that's exactly, as a leader, what he did for you.
20 years ago this happened, and I still remember that encounter in that hallway with him.
Right, because he was bearing witness to you, which is amazing, right? Okay, so you've done so much. It feels silly to even ask this question, but of course everybody has goals. It seems like you've done enough. I just want you to go and rest and stay warm. But is there a goal that Alison still wants to accomplish?
So you're gonna laugh because it's not mountain related, but I want to open a dog rescue for older Labrador retrievers and golden retrievers that are 10 years old and older, because I love dogs so much. That's my lab that we lost about 2 years ago, Trooper. I dedicated my book to him. I loved him so much, so I still have to keep him with me. I have another lab now, but he was my soulmate dog. But I love these older dogs so much, and I just want to take them in and spoil them for the rest of their lives, because dogs just bring me so much joy. So that's one thing. But also I do have like this initiative that I started in Uganda that I want to go back there and do more work with them. But I trained the very first female mountain guides and porters in these mountains called the Ruwenzori Mountains in Western Uganda. And I've gone back there several times to train more and more women, but I haven't been back in a few years. So I want to get back there again. In terms of like mountains, I live in Colorado, so I get out to the mountains all the time, but I don't feel like I need to like do something riskier than Mount Everest, because I feel fortunate that things have gone my way and I've come back from every expedition. I love going out to the mountains, but I don't feel like I need to like do something riskier than Everest. I just feel like I should count my blessings and be happy with my accomplishments and, like live the rest of my life trying to encourage other people to do things that will inspire them and enrich their lives. But I don't feel like I need to risk my life to do that.
I don't know how much this counts for you, but I affirm everything that you're saying, and I agree that your gifts are now used for other reasons because of all of the work that you put in before. Now you are helping and inspiring by sharing your story, so please stay on dry land. Alison, you've been an inspiration today. You have just given us so many nuggets of goodness about leadership and about resilience and about even the fact when you said, it's not the strongest and smartest and most technical person that's going to get to the top. It's the one that has all of the leadership skills to not just think about the I, but think about the we.
The one that won't give up. You got to be relentless. You just don't give up. You're going to get there if you don't give up. That's it. That's the key. That's the magic. Don't give up.
Yeah, and you're certainly not giving up anytime soon. Alison Levine, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your time and inspiration with us, and for getting us to the top of the mountain with you today.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be here with all of you, so thank you for the opportunity.
Alison, thank you so much for your time today. It's been truly amazing to learn about your incredible adventures, hear your unique perspective on leadership as well. And Team 711, make sure you stay tuned for more great content coming your way through our Activate Her series. And as a reminder, you can always visit our Activate Her page on My 7 Hub.